Chapter 7 discusses the importance of feedback. We have all learned through our program influences questionnaire that we did in week 1 that feedback has a very high effect size. But a drawback of feedback is that the effect size sometimes varies. The effect size is 7 point. In Chapter 7, we are going to discuss the importance of feedback. We all learned through our program influences questionnaire that we completed in week 1 that feedback has a very high effect size. But a disadvantage of feedback is that the effects sometimes vary. The effect size of feedback is 0.79, which is nearly double the average effect size of most any other influence that we discussed. Hattie has worked on a model of feedback and efforts of maximizing the benefits from feedback in classrooms. The easiest way for us to learn the gap is to use Sadler's 1989 definition. Sadler stated that the gap is the difference between where a student is and where the student should be. He believes that the gap can help us understand feedback. So not only should a teacher know where their students are and where they should be, but they should also make this information available to their students. That way the students can see, where am I at and where do I need to be? This can hopefully motivate the students when they can see themselves making progress. So Hattie and Temperley, 2006, stated that the feedback serves many purposes in reducing the gap. We're going to talk about the 3 purposes they discussed. The first is that they believe feedback can provide cues that capture a person's attention and helps him or her focus on proceeding with the task. The second is that it can provide information about ideas that have been misunderstood. This can be seen as correcting a student. And the final purpose is that, as we just discussed, feedback can be motivational so that students invest more effort or skill in the task. So something that should be addressed is the belief that feedback thrives on error, because we need to understand that error is not limited to the lower achieving students and that error is not necessarily a bad thing. Hattie believes that error allows for opportunities, and I think that in our class, Dr. Welch has instilled this in us, because we're not afraid of making errors, because now we are learning through our errors. Hattie stated that to know the error is necessary to move towards success, and that is the purpose of providing feedback to students. Hattie argues that feedback works at 4 different levels and addresses 3 feedback questions. First, we're going to talk about the 3 feedback questions. The first, where am I going? The second, how am I going there? And the last, where to next? Let's discuss the first feedback question. Where am I going? This question is related to goals. Teachers should make the goals of the lessons clear to the students. It's found that most high school students' goals are more performance related, which is goals like, I want to finish this task, I want to be on time, I want to complete this paper, versus mastery related goals, and these are goals such as, I want to actually understand the content and I want to master this particular skill. Hattie believes that this is the result of teachers covering the curriculums, which ask for more performance related goals. When I read this, the first thing that came to my mind is the teachers that are known to teach for the test. The students aren't actually learning the knowledge, but rather just memorizing. It's more performance-based goals. I want to memorize this information, versus mastery-related goals such as, I want to learn this information. So let's talk about a study with Sandra Hesty in 2011. Sandra Hesty interviewed middle school students who were familiar with setting mastery goals in their sport and social lives and found that their academic goals were more performance related rather than mastery related. Sandra taught the teachers how to set mastery goals and how to share goals with the students. The students then monitored their goals, and the teachers also monitored themselves for completion of communicating goals to the student. I feel that the purpose of this study was to show the importance of shifting the students' expectations of their work from such goals as I want to complete this assignment and to being more concerned about the quality of the work they were turning in. In Samantha Smith in 2009, she was known as the Dean of Success in her high school. She kept up with over 1,000 students' progress in both reading and math. She then used the data she had collected to project the number of credits and GPA for each student at the end of that current year. She then took the information that she collected, gave it to teachers with the task of read the information, tell me whether you agree with it or you disagree with it, and ask if they would be willing to set higher goals than she had set. Well, out of everybody she asked, only half of the teachers in that school agreed to do the task, and the other half refused to do the task, giving reasons such as, I am not responsible for students reaching goals. Well, not surprisingly, at the end of the year, the group that agreed to do the task outperformed the half of the teachers who denied the task. So let's talk about yet another element of goals. Let's talk about how challenging goals are related to feedback. Hattie believes that they're related in 3 major ways, and we're going to go over those 3. The first one is challenging goals inform individuals about the levels of performance desired. This means that the students can track their performance toward these goals. The second is that feedback allows students and their teachers to set further appropriately challenging goals as the previous ones are attained. This establishes the conditions for ongoing learning. This makes sense because when a student achieves a goal, you no longer want to set similar goals at the same level. You want to challenge that student to go beyond the previous goal so that they're learning. And finally, if there's no challenge, the feedback is probably of little or any value. If students already know the material or find it too easy, then seeking or providing feedback will have little effect. I also think that this one can even have a negative impact on the student, because if there's no challenge, then it is likely that the student will get bored with the subject, and if they're waiting on feedback rather than working ahead, I can see that this would have a negative consequence. I think what is important to take away from the question, where am I going, is to remember that everything we discuss, whether it be the goals or the challenging goals, the targets, it's important to know that every one of them not only said the teacher should know where students are at and where they're going, the teacher should know how to set appropriate goals, but it was also just as important for the teachers to be able to communicate all of this with the students. The second feedback question, how am I going there, This question stresses the importance of progress feedback. Hattie defines progress feedback as feedback relative to the starting or finish point, and it is expressed in relation to an expected standard. For example, this is where a teacher can give a student feedback on how much progress you have or have not made toward a particular academic goal that the student has set for themselves. This is rapid formative feedback is really important in this phase because this is feedback that is relative to where the student is in his or her own progress, rather than comparing that student's progress to other students in the same class. William and colleagues state that there are 5 strategies that teachers can use when a student is in this phase to make learning more effective. The first is clarifying and sharing intentions and criteria for success. The second, engineering effective classroom discussions, questions, and learning tasks. The third, providing feedback that moves learners forward. Encouraging students to see themselves as owners of their own learning. And lastly, activating students as instructional resources for each other. I think that as a class, we do the last one a lot by when we participate in our forums and our classmates provide us feedback. I think that this is an example of activating the students to be instructional resources for each other. The final feedback question, where to next, can lead to all of the below listed things. What is most important to take from this question, though, is that not only is it important for teachers to provide an answer to this question for students, but it's more important for teachers to communicate to students that they can provide their own answers to this question. The 3 feedback questions we just discussed will work at 4 different levels of feedback. We will now discuss the 4 feedback levels. Feedback at the task and product level is the most common type of feedback in classrooms. It's more information-based and is sometimes referred to as corrective feedback or knowledge of results. So some examples of this feedback are indicating correct or incorrect responses, needing more or different responses, providing more or different information relevant to the task, and building more task knowledge. Below is the example that the book gave on page 119 of task and product level feedback. Your learning goal was to structure your account in such a way that the first thing that you wrote was the first thing that you did. Then you were to write about other things that you did in the same order that it had happened. This is an example of providing more information relevant to the task. It's important to remember that this feedback needs to be understood before you can build on to the later levels of feedback. Feedback at the process level is aimed at processes used to complete a task and can lead to alternative processing. This feedback at the process level produces a deeper understanding than feedback at the task and product level. This is an example that Hattie used on page 119 of a process level feedback. You're stuck on this word and you looked at me instead of trying to work it out. Can you work out why you might have got it wrong, and can you try a different strategy? This example challenges students to develop an alternative learning strategy. Feedback at the third level is referred to as self-regulation because it focuses on the students' monitoring of their own learning processes. When students monitor and self-regulate their own learning, they are able to use the feedback more effectively and reducing the gap between where they currently are and where they should be. An example of the self-regulation level feedback is on Page 120. I'm impressed by how you went back to the beginning of the sentence when you became stuck on this word. But in this case, it didn't help. What else could you do? When you decide on what it means, I want you to tell me how confident you are and why. Feedback at this level is usually in the form of reflective or probing questions. In this example, the teacher is asking the student, what else could you do? This is asking the student to reflect back on their learning processes and how they could benefit from using a different learning strategy. The fourth and final level of feedback is self-level. In this level, the feedback is directed toward the self rather than the process. For example, you did a great job on that task. This level of feedback is usually happily accepted by students, and some refer to it as praise. It is important to keep praise and feedback separate because praise can sometimes minimize the importance of the actual process. By itself, praise has a low effect size of 0.12. But when feedback with no praise is compared to feedback with praise has a higher effect size of 0.34. Praising a person as a whole, such as "you're a smart girl," versus praising a person's effort, "you had a nice effort," both of these had either zero or negative effect size. It is believed that praise supports learned helplessness by students not completing tasks because they are waiting for praise. The final word on praise is that even though praise has a low effect size, is that when combined with feedback but kept separate from feedback on the process, it could benefit. Hattie states that the art of effective teaching is providing the right form of feedback at or just above the level at which the student is working, and to not to mix the praise into the feedback. This is figure 7.1, the feedback levels and questions that Hattie provides us with in Chapter 7. It is a visual representation of how the 3 feedback questions work on the 4 different levels of feedback. And this is my reference, and thank you for listening.